Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Better Take a Dungeon. This is the second installment of the official Better Take a Dungeon series. This is going to be specifically told from the Marauder perspective. I am using a new character so that I can show everything as it happens from a level 15 standpoint. I am currently joined by a Scholar, a Bard, and a Summoner. We will be running this dungeon over the course of the next half hour or so, I hope, in order to clear the final boss at the end, as according to the duty finder, which is currently located over here, demonstrating each goal as we go down. The limit break bar is going to be relatively new up at the top, as are the strength, which is not highlighted, dexterity, vitality, intelligence, mind, which is not highlighted, and piety bonuses that we're going to get from being partied up. If this is your first time being partied up, it might be news to you to see all of these things. We're going to start the dungeon. We have two poles in front of us. We have all of our DPSs here and apparently ready. So we're going to go ahead and mark using the signs button. You can access your signs button by going into actions and traits, main command. Scroll down until you get signs. If you open up the window, you'll notice that the individual buttons can also be dragged off onto their own separate spots if you so prefer. I'm going to mark this one as 1, hit tab, and mark this one as 2 in order to note the kill order for our DPS, which is the Bard and the Summoner. The Scholar will most likely be damaging as well, but they are primarily responsible for healing. I'm going to open up as a Marauder with Tomahawk, which is a 15 yalm range skill, which means I'm going to need to get relatively close to it in order to use it, but not nearly as close as I would for Heavy Swing or Skull Center, which are my primary melee attacks that we'll be using through the majority of the dungeon. Alright, I want you to pay attention to the class icons on the left over here. They will receive a bar, as I currently have enemies targeted, and we're engaging them in battle. There will also be an icon of enemy lists up here in the top right of my screen. It will default to the left side of your screen if you have not edited your HUD at all. But we will be going over those in the middle of combat. So we'll go ahead and jump in with these first two black bats, and I will describe everything that's happening as it's going along. All right? So I'll open up with Tomahawk, and then I'm going to wait until the two get together. I'm going to open up with, I'm going to follow up with an Overpower, and then go into my Heavy Swing and Skull Sunder combo. Now, with them marked like this, I'm going to go ahead and Overpower again. With them marked like this, you'll notice that these bars over here will denote, they climb up and down as other people deal damage to these various enemies. So as the Scholar heals, as the Fairy heals, as the DPS classes actually deal damage to each individual mob, the size of their bar will increase. The person who has maximum aggro will have an A against their name. Go ahead and mark these guys. I accidentally pulled here. There's two moves, Heavy Swing and Skull Sunder. I'm swapping between targets to make sure that nobody else is getting too close to the full bar. If somebody else gets a full bar, you'll see my bar start to drop. This is a Sastasha point. Finding a bloodstained scrap of parchment with message scrawled across in faded ink. The captain likes his cabbage green. So green is going to be the important color later on. The enmity list, which will appear in the right side over here, I'm going to go ahead and mark the Aurelia and the two black bats. We're also going to use positioning right here. When I grab this, I'm going to run through them so that I am facing the enemies away from the rest of the party, because they will have a ground-marked AoE that I want to make sure is only threatening me, if at all possible. So we'll go ahead and pull the Cave Aurelia. And then once again, we will overpower the group. If the Cave Aurelia lives long enough, we'll see the Tendril, it's electric Tendril. There is Numbing Tendrils, which is a ground-marked AoE. Simply step out of it to avoid the damage. You can step back into it before the animation plays, and you'll still take no damage as long as you're not standing in the red area. A denotation of aggro is the square, the rounded square that will appear up at the top. It's flashing gold or red, colorblind. Apologies. There's actually 4 tiers of aggro. We'll actually show them to you here. We'll go ahead and mark 1 and 2. I'm going to let other people pull aggro off of me right here. I'm just not going to attack for a few seconds. You'll notice that they get the A on this party list right here. You'll also notice that the icon changes. The lowest icon is the gray dot. The upward-facing arrow is the next highest tier of aggro. The downward-facing arrow is the highest tier of aggro you can get. That generally means you're about to pull aggro. As a tank, pretty much everything should always have a square on it. Just like this is what your enemy list should look like. This giant clam enemy over here can only be attacked when its mouth is open, so we need to utilize timing in our attacks to make sure that we're attacking it when it's vulnerable, but ignoring it when it's invulnerable. This arrow, the line you see going from one enemy to another, means that these two enemies are linked. Despite their distance, if I pull one of them, the other one is going to come to its aid. If you mouse over the enemy, you'll see that they have the links to them. If you don't mouse over the enemy, there are no links present. So anytime you're about to pull an enemy, it's generally good practice, if you've never done a dungeon before, to mouse over the enemy to see if any additional adds are going to be pulled. If they are, please make sure to mark both of them if you're marking target kill orders. We're going to use Overpower again here. And we're actually going to utilize Overpower after every other Heavy Swing and Skull Sunder. TP is a limited resource down here at the bottom. It regenerates out of combat. It regenerates in combat as well, but to a much lesser extent. We're going to grab this entire group with an Overpower. We missed one, so I'm going to do it again in order to get the one that I missed to make sure that none of these fires are going down on other people. The clam just closed, so we're going to tab off of it for a second, target other enemies, and then go back when it's vulnerable again. Every time it opens up, it will also summon another Shade Seeker. I believe only if they're dead, but it actually might spawn no matter what. There's 2 fossil shells right here. They actually hit relatively hard. We're not going to mark them this time. It's generally good habit to keep up communication with the groups that you're running with. If you don't mark adds and you decide to focus on a single target the entire time, it is not uncommon to see the other one lost to AoEs of party members or healers. Particularly if you never open up with an Overpower at all. You can also cross-class Flash from the Gladiator tree if you've also played some Gladiator before you played Marauder. That's actually another good way of holding group AoE. But since not all Marauders have it, I'm actually not going to be using Flash in this dungeon. It is by no means a prerequisite. There's 3 more enemies this time. It's really hard to tell what the third enemy is. It's actually the Cave Aurelia, all the way over here in the corner. I'm actually going to mark the Cave Aurelia with a 3 in this case. Because it has a dodgeable attack, the Numbing Tendrils attack, it's relatively easy to dodge. The Sastasha Orobon tends to deal the most damage to me, so that's going to be my primary target. However, it's too far away for me to get to naturally, so I'm actually going to Tomahawk the Fossil Shell, and then I'm going to Overpower on the Sastasha Orobon. And then I'll wait for the Aurelia and add another Overpower. And then we'll target our primary target and enter our standard combo. If you're level 18, then you will have the Maim ability. Maim is particularly important. We're taking some damage here, actually. I'm going to pop Foresight to reduce the amount of damage I'm taking by increasing my defense. It's one of the Marauder cooldown abilities. Things are killed a little out of order there. Not too big of a deal. We lost aggro on the Cave Aurelia for a second, but nothing is unrecoverable. Even if it had gone on the enemy for a short period of time, we still would have been fine. This is an optional kill over here. We can actually skip this entire group of mobs to have no detriment. We will be skipping some mobs later on in the dungeon. But for now, we'll go ahead and get this treasure chest. This is actually a large number of enemies, but it's something that Marauder specifically is very well suited for. Because of the sheer number of enemies, Marauder is one of the earliest classes to get an area of effect attack, which is what Overpower is. Looks like someone accidentally pulled some of the Shade Seekers from the next section over. We'll go ahead and pick up the rest of them. It's our role as a tank to minimize the amount of damage that's going on among all of our friends. So that's the main reason why we want to hold aggro. We are the best suited to taking large amounts of damage. If you hit one of the wrong formations, remember, the captain prefers his cabbage green. But if we hit one of the wrong formations first, it's not really the end of the world. All it does is summon an extra enemy to kill and poison me for a relatively long period of time. Poison can be removed by conjurers, but not by scholars at this level. So this is just going to tick on me for a while, but I wanted to demonstrate what would happen if you happened to get the thing wrong. And then you could just choose the next one. But it's easier if you know which one initially, and you go directly to the right location. This will summon our first boss. We hit the inconspicuous switch over here. It will be a Coero, and it'll have a ground-marked AoE that I will be using Brutal Swing, which is a stun ability, in order to interrupt. This will be the first time we're going to be using interrupts in a dungeon. I'm primarily just going to be using Heavy Swing and Skull Sunder, my primary combination. If somebody starts getting too close to my aggro level, I'll introduce some Quick Knock as well. There is the AoE. When the charge bar starts up at the top, I simply use my Brutal Swing ability, and that will interrupt the charge bar, and it will make the AoE safe to stand in. I do not have my stun this time, so I need to step out of the AoE, otherwise I risk paralysis. Paralysis has a tendency to interrupt your current attacks. I just gained a level. There's nothing wrong with going through and giving out your attribute points. I'm going to go ahead and assign my attribute points to Vitality right now. No reason not to have done that before the dungeon, but it reminded me halfway through. This is the detail of how loots work. Essentially, anybody can roll on any item via the greed method. Pass is an automatic default; it goes directly to 0. And any class that has that the item is designed for instance, the Plundered Haubergen, is actually designed for the Lancer class, although it can be worn by the Marauder and Gladiator classes. So we can't roll need on it, despite being able to wear it. for Lancers. So while we could roll greed on it, you'll notice that the defense and magic defense goes down from our current set. So it's actually not as good as what we're currently wearing. We're going to go ahead and pass on this. I will hit the inconspicuous switch to open the door, and we will move on to the next part of the dungeon. Opening the hidden door also shows in the duty finder over here that we need to now discover the pirate captain, which presumably will be later on in the dungeon. This was actually a 3-unit patrol. We're actually going to go over patrols again a little bit later in this tutorial. But basically, patrols are wandering groups of mobs that don't necessarily stand in one specific spot the entire time. Almost all mobs in this game have patrols of some variety or another. This marker right here denotes the lockout area. If you are on the wrong side when the timer expires, this becomes a solid wall that you cannot pass. So you need to make sure that before you actually pull the boss, that everybody is on the inside of this line. Since pulling bosses and mobs is generally the tank's responsibility in order to allow you to establish aggro and a sufficient amount of threat, it's generally a good practice for a tank to double check to make sure everybody is across this line, which is generally considered to be a sign they are ready. If you have any doubts, you can access the Ready Check system by going into the Party menu and then selecting Ready Check. This confirms that all 4 party members are ready for the instance. So we will take a few steps forward. We will denote the killing order so that everybody knows the order to focus targets on. I'm actually going to open with an overpower on Captain Madison because he happens to have the highest hit point total. The way aggro is generated by DPS classes is directly related to the amount of damage they have. So if the enemy is at half health and you have twice the next highest person's aggro, there is pretty much a 0 chance that they will ever actually overtake your aggro before that enemy dies. There simply isn't enough life left on the enemy for them to deal enough damage to steal aggro from you at that point. Captain Madison will run away when he's about half health. There's not actually any AoEs during that fight. The Captain Madison fights in general don't have any marked ground AoEs that we need to worry about positioning. These are ethereal brass knuckles. This is a pugilist weapon. Again, not something we need. If we had a pugilist alt, then perhaps we could roll greed on it for future reference, for future use. Or if we wanted to turn this into a grand company later on, that would also be a good concept. If nobody else is rolling greed on anything, or if you have a particular interest in that class, feel free to roll greed on something. We're going to roll greed on this just to show you what it's like to get an item. We'll roll greed. The number will appear. It's at 89 for a brief moment. And then the pair of ethereal brass knuckles is placed in our armory chest. If we open up our armory chest, it will just be located either directly in the armory chest or any overflow will go into our inventory, first available inventory slot. This next group, this group right here, we can actually skip it entirely. I'm going to go around them just to show that we can go around them. But before I do, I'm going to make sure that everybody else knows not to pull these enemies. So I'm actually going to put an ignore mark on them. And I'm going to type in party chat, and I'm going to ask my party to go around. That communicates with the party. You can simply hit Alt-P if you're using a PC interface, or you'll need to get a keyboard out if you want to to communicate on PS4. I do recommend a keyboard if you do have a PS4. It is worth its weight in gold in this game to be able to communicate to your allies. So if we are ignoring this group, we are going to need to pull this group. So we will go ahead and mark. Whoops. We will go ahead and mark these two enemies right here, and then I will pull with a tomahawk into an overpower. And then I'll just go into my main combo. I'm going to tab back and forth increasingly as we continue through this dungeon. It's a good habit to get in because it allows you to check to make sure that somebody isn't about to pull aggro off of you. I just wanted to show you that there are in fact enemies back here that we are skipping as well. They're just tucked back into the... in fact, if we step in a little bit, there we go. They're just tucked back here into this little side room. There's not really any reason to go into that room. Back over here in this side room, we have two more enemies. Again, there's no reason to go back into this room, but I'm just showing that you don't actually need to kill every enemy in an instance. However, if we were interested in gaining as much experience as possible, we could kill these enemies for their experience and the small amount of gil that they give. There's a treasure coffer in the back over here. We can kill them to get that treasure coffer, but Sastasha actually allows you to run backwards along this wall right here, and then inch forward, close enough to the treasure coffer to loot. There it is. And then we can run back around. Most likely somebody just obtained a potion or some other concept. Sometimes these side treasure coffers can actually drop more interesting loot, like new cuirasses for yourself or equipment for people. We skipped this group earlier. If you hit spacebar, it's going to allow you to jump in-game. This allows you to scale in-game geometry. You can actually use the spacebar's jumping ability to completely bypass this entire group. We're just going to continue pulling over here. We'll mark to indicate that we're going to be pulling this group. This enemy right here, the Shallow Scale Reaver, is hidden. Does not allow me to click him due to his positioning. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to walk a little closer so that he's not being hidden by geometry, and I will select him here in order to mark that he's marked 2. The dog was patrolling back and forth and ended up catching up to me before I managed to stop to aggro him myself, to use Tomahawk. Once again, we're getting a little bit low. I'm going to use Foresight once more. The enemy got thrown backwards by the Garuda Edgy. Some enemies and allies are going to have knockback attacks. Primarily at this level, Emerald Carbuncle, Conjurers, and Garuda Edgy. So now we have the Captain's Quarters key. This happens to be the Captain's Quarters up here. So we're going to mark 1 and 2. We will pull 1 with a Tomahawk, and we will follow up with an Overpower. This is going to be a standard combo for a very long period of time. Marauder's bread and butter is open with Tomahawk, use Overpower once the enemies are grouped, switch to your primary rotation, which right now is Heavy Swing and Skull Sunder. Other abilities will be added to it later on. And then use our primary rotation with the occasional extra Overpower to make sure that we're holding aggro thoroughly. We can then open the Captain's Quarters by interacting with it, and then saying, yes, I would like to unlock the door. There's one enemy inside. This is the Shallowtail Reaver. He actually does have a ground-marked AoE. It's one of the most hard-hitting AoEs, percentage of health-wise, in the entire game. If it happens to hit another ally, we're probably going to end up seeing a death. So we want to make sure that when we're pulling him, we're facing him away from the rest of the group. Once again, I use Tomahawk. Heavy Swing, Skull Sunder. Remember, we also have Brutal Swing, which will allow us to interrupt an ability. His Overpower happens to take a very long time to cast, if we even see it, because our damage here happens to be rather good. Didn't even see Overpower. It's very nice. It is a conical-shaped AoE that begins from him. We will see conical-shaped AoEs later on in the final boss of the dungeon. There's extra rooms that I have not explored. If you're interested in seeing the entire map, you just need to cross a threshold in order to unlock more of the map. This particular instance is actually an area where enemies are fighting each other in a bar fight. I'm not actually interested in pulling the enemies. There's actually a healer in the back over here. Let's see if I can actually target him without pulling aggro. There's a treasure coffer I can loot as well. I would like to note the healer, but I am not seeing. There he is. This particular enemy right here is actually using Cure on his allies. In general, what that's going to do is it's going to show a cast bar up at the top. Maybe it's not him. There it is. Cure shows a cast bar up at the top. At any time you see a cast bar, you can try to interrupt it using a silence or a stun. That would actually probably be a stunnable move, but due to the fact that he's a healer and there's a large number of enemies there, I'm actually going to avoid that group. It's a relatively dangerous pull. So there's still one area I haven't explored yet, the hole over here. There's 2 more enemies. I'm going to open up my signs menu and mark them. And we'll just open up directly with an Overpower or 2. This enemy has a bow, which means he's not going to follow me if I get put distance between me and him. His friend will, since his friend is melee. This is a shallow eye Reaver as opposed to a shallow scale Reaver. In general, these enemies are denoted by what you would associate their weapon with. A scale is associated with a shield, and an eye is associated with marksmanship or a bow. So then we can pick up that key by interacting with it, interact with the door, and then interact with the treasure chest. This is Plundered Earrings. This is actually a phenomenal drop. This is one of the more rare drops from Sastasha. In fact, it tends to sell for several thousand gil in the market by virtue of it being a level 15 set of caster earrings, and the only available set of caster earrings until level 28. So this is actually a very good drop. I'm going to hit Greed, because even though I can't use it, I would like to sell it, and therefore that denotes a desire of money, and therefore greed in me. It's a really good way. If I actually needed to equip this for my character, I could roll Need, or I could roll Greed if I had something better on my character. For instance, Arya has earring 29, so probably isn't in desperate need. This is probably not a direct upgrade to their gear, so they would probably be better off, communally speaking, rolling Greed rather than Need on this roll. Once again, we'll open up with Overpower. Marauder has a much stronger base than Gladiator does at the same level. So it's actually a relatively easy class to wing it with, to not use signs, to not call out who you're going to kill. As long as you're tabbing between the targets, you're making sure you're changing targets as you go, you should never have any major problems with Marauder. Once again, we're going to be meeting the captain up here. This is similar to what it was before. There will be another marked line to cross. We will mark this line and wait for everybody else. We didn't want to pull quickly. There is a 15-second delay, but if our summoner was AFK in the back, away from keyboard or not able to respond, then when we were coming up here to this next group of enemies, they would have been locked out of the entire duration of the fight, which not only happens to be slightly rude, but is also a great hindrance to being able to successfully complete the fight. Later on, there will be a group of dogs that will be coming from over here behind this cage. It will be called for by Captain Madison about halfway through the fight. So we'll want to make sure that we're saving some TP for the ability to pick up and hold the aggro of the dogs, because otherwise they're going to be heading directly towards our healer, and we need to make sure that our healer stays protected. Otherwise, we will lose our heals. And if we don't have any heals, we're liable to die. So that's no good. So I'll be opening up once again with Tomahawk into Overpower. I will position the guys facing away so that I can observe Mark A and the enemies that are hiding behind it, since I know they're going to be showing up. I'm also going to be popping Foresight, which is going to reduce the amount of incoming damage that I have. We've used Overpower several times. We still have a few uses left. It should only take one or two to pick up the entire group and hold them. If we were worried about not having enough, we could actually stop attacking for a period of time, and our TP will generate at a tick of 60 points every 3 seconds. This is a debuff that is reducing my accuracy. Eos is healed over here. We're actually just going to go and pick up the entire group. I have accuracy down again, which is going to make me miss. Missing is very dangerous when it comes to tanks. Anytime you miss, you are essentially forfeiting your damage and all of the aggro that you would get from that attack. So we do want to make sure that we're maintaining a decent aggro lead as we run through them. This is the Pirate's Bandana. This is a Disciple of War icon. Things that are specifically designed for Marauders and Gladiators will have this class list on them right here: Gladiator, Marauder, Paladin, Warrior, and not simply say Disciple of War. You can also check by testing the item level compared to its defense. If the item level is higher than your current equipment, but the defense is lower, then it's probably not an item designed for tanks. We'll go ahead and pass on this as well. Up ahead, we see a patrolling dog back and forth. All patrol is an enemy that moves back and forth. There's actually several ways of handling this next room. We're going to stick to the left side, but we're still going to clear the entire group. So we'll mark each enemy with a sign. We're going to pull the dog, and then we will use, when it gets nearer us, and then we will use Overpower to hold the entire group. We will also collapse directly to the Shallow Eye Reaver, since we know that he is ranged by virtue of having a bow. So he's not going to follow us wherever we run. So it's easier to pull the melee to the Shallow Eye Reaver than it is to pull the Shallow Eye Reaver somewhere else. So since we want to group everybody up to make sure that Overpower is hitting everybody, the best case scenario is to collapse upon any ranged enemies. One final note: if we were tanking in melee, I'm just going to go ahead and use my Skull Sunder from my previous pull to get an immediate aggro boost on this enemy. And then I'm going to group over here with the Shallow Eye Reaver, who once again has a tendency to follow us around, or to not follow us around. I should also note that if we had any melee DPS, a Lancer or a Monk, standing still while tanking is very important. I've been doing so for the duration of the dungeon out of habit, but I do want to make sure that you understand why standing still is important, because positional attacks which can be easily noted by the side right here, or the back, the empty spot of the circle in the rear. Certain attacks will deal more damage from melee classes if they are done from the correct positional angle. As such, since maximizing DPS is important in order to kill things on time, holding as still as possible allows the melee DPS to maneuver and damage as they see fit. Once again, we're entering the final boss area, so once again it will have another one of those lines that you want to make sure that everybody is crossed before we actually pull. I'm going to use the waymark system in order to determine in order to better communicate to my group how I want positionings to be managed. We will use this A mark, this B mark, and this C mark, and I will politely ask my group certain assignments. So I will ask, could Rin be at point A? Kiari at point B? And Arya at point C. What that's going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to click on these unnatural ripples. Throughout the fight, bubbles will start to form, and if you can click on the interactable object while the area is bubbling, you will prevent an additional monster from spawning over the course of the fight. If the ripples are not handled appropriately, then it's very easy to get overrun with adds and therefore start taking increasingly large amounts of damage, which means either you need to spend damage on killing the new enemies in order to reduce the amount of damage going down to the tank, or you need to kill the boss even faster, because once the boss dies, no matter how many adds happen to be alive, the fight is over and those adds will despawn or disappear. It's important to make sure that your healer will stay within range of you. I will be taking this last point in this corner, so when I pull him, I'm going to hold him roughly at this light. I would mark it with a waymark, but the other waymarks are already down. I'll be holding him roughly at this light, so that in case this unnatural ripples starts to bubble, I can still hopefully make it there in time and interrupt it. We will go ahead and pull with Tomahawk and just go straight into our combo rather than using Overpower. This is going to be a long fight, so TP is going to be important over the course of it. This enemy will also have a ground-marked AoE. We're going to make sure that the conical ground-marked AoE is not going to accidentally hit Aos, which is our actual healer. The fairy provides heals. There are in fact bubbles on the water's surface, so I will go over here and press this button. In the meantime, over here, the conical AoE, Hydro Shot, had been started to channel. Once again, we have unnatural ripples, but he's not stuck holding another attack right now, so I actually used my stun. And then I walked over there and I hit. Stun, once again, is your brutal swing ability. It will stun the enemy for a few seconds, generally long enough to get one thing done. Unfortunately, I have no more stuns, and damage will interrupt the interaction. So I need to time the interaction specifically after an auto attack, but before the next auto attack. It's a very tight timing window. You shouldn't feel bad for missing it sometimes. One or two extra adds is not overly difficult. Primarily, it's when all of the spots are ignored and you end up with 4 or 5 ads that things get extremely dicey. That is the completion of the Sastasha dungeon. I am recognizant. This was Better Take a Dungeon. The last thing that there is to do is you will have a player commendation button if you have grouped up with people you have not pre-partied with. These have all been pre-partied with me, so player commendations is not available. Loot the final dungeon chest, decide whether or not you're going to look for it, or going to go ahead and hit greed on this item. And wave farewell to the people. You can also congratulate them verbally using the party chat. Or, if you type in a word and hit tab, you can access the auto-translate dictionary. I'm personally a big fan of Let's Play Together Again sometime. That is Better Take a Dungeon, Installment 2. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you learned something. Till I see you next time.